Welcome to Club Book with Oscar Hokeah. My name is Mona Susan Power, and I am a Yankton Dakota writer who lives in Minnesota. As we get started, we would like to take a moment to acknowledge the Dakota people, Indigenous keepers of the land on which most of us are joining this virtual event from today. This land was reserved for the Dakota in the Treaty of Traverse des Sioux, signed with the United States in 1851. And it remains sacred to us today. We also acknowledge the Ojibwe people, fellow Indigenous inhabitants of this land. The Dakota and Ojibwe people are the original stewards of story in this place now called Minnesota. The organizers of Club Book honor this tradition and the knowledge and values embedded in it, as we all work together to lift up storytellers in our state. Before I introduce tonight's guest properly, allow me a moment to tell you a bit more about the unique series that is bringing him to us. Club Book is a program of MELSA, the Metropolitan Library Service Agency, made possible through Minnesota's Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and coordinated by Library Strategies, part of the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library. Hennepin County Library is the co-organizer of this evening's talk. Thanks also to partnering bookseller, the wonderful Red Balloon Bookshop. A purchase link to Calling for a Blanket Dance will be available in the comments section of this live stream feed. Have it shipped, pick it up at their lovely store in St. Paul, or have them deliver it personally to your door if you're close to the area. Our final housekeeping note. Also in the comments, you'll see a survey link. MELSA would greatly appreciate hearing what you think of this Club Book program. It's quick and easy. Now for our featured event, Oscar Hokeah is a citizen of the Cherokee Nation and the Kiowa Tribe of Oklahoma. He also proudly claims Mexican ancestry on his father's side. His wonderful, amazing award-winning fiction explores intertribal identity and multicultural heritage. Hokeah honed his craft at the prestigious Institute of American Indian Arts, and his prose can be found in American Short Fiction, World Literature Today, and Literary Hub. Algonquin Books released Hokeah's first novel, Calling for a Blanket Dance, to wide acclaim in July 2022. Like the author himself, intrepid protagonist Ever Geimausaddle comes from a family that is part Native American, part Mexican. Quote, drawing on a wealth of Indigenous tradition, Calling for a Blanket Dance underscores the quiet strength that arises when family is true to its identity and the too common tragedy that results when identity is suppressed, the millions. After a short talk by our guest and some initial questions coming from me, we'll have time for audience Q&A. Simply drop your questions in the comments thread here on Facebook, and our tech manager will route them to me. If you'd prefer to contribute a question a bit more anonymously, you can also send a private message to Club Book here on Facebook, or send an email to clubbookmn@gmail.com. So now I would like to invite Oscar Hokeah to take over for a little while and share with us some of his story, where he comes from and how he came to write his wonderful novel. And I think he's going to read some excerpts.
Oscar Hokeah. I'm super excited to be here. I'm very grateful to Club Book. I'm very grateful for Mona for joining me on this today, and I'm very excited about this event for a long time. So I'm a super fanboy of Mona's work, and we got A Council of Dolls is coming out in August. Is that right, Mona? Okay, yeah, so it's coming out in August, and so get your pre-orders. It's an amazing book, and but yeah, just super excited to be here. And I'm going to talk today a little bit about, well, I guess this is what we're going to talk about today. This is the debut novel. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read a little bit, and from two different sections. I'll talk a little bit about those sections and how they ended up in the book. And it'll give me an opportunity to kind of connect it back to my own kind of personal life, and how I chose to write about certain characters, and then where they showed up in my life, and how I alter real circumstances and make them fiction. So it's just kind of a method that I use when I write. To start off with, I'd like to jump. We're going to jump kind of deep into the debut. So the main character of the novel is Ever Geimausaddle, like Mona had mentioned, and so it follows his life. And every chapter is read by a different family member, and so we hear from grandma, grandpa, aunties, uncles, cousins, siblings, and then in the last chapter, Ever Geimausaddle speaks for himself. And so what I'm going to do is I'd like to jump to a chapter to the second. Actually, I think it's the third to last chapter. And this is Leander Chestnut. And so Leander Chestnut is Ever Geimausaddle's adopted son. So when we get to this point in the novel, Ever Geimausaddle is an adult. When we first start off, he's 6 months old. And so we see him kind of grow, and we see these kind of obstacles that pop up for him. So he's becoming more and more aggressive. And the concern is if he's going to be able to beat that. Is he going to be a problem for the community, or is he going to figure out a way to be a healing solution for the community? And so we get to a point in the novel where we hear from his adopted son, and we get to take his perspective. And so Leander Chestnut was born out of my work working with at-risk Native youth, because Leander is he's in a novel. And so Ever Geimausaddle comes into life whenever he's about 16, 17 years old, and then takes him into his home. He's highly aggressive. The only alternative for him outside of this, him going into what we call treatment foster care or therapeutic foster care, is that he would have to go to a detention center. He's too aggressive to go into like a regular kind of boys' home. And so whenever I first started out my career working with at-risk Native youth, I started working in group homes, going with Pueblo, Apache, and Dene youth. And so a similar situation that plays out in the novel, from life, in that I was working in this group home. They lost their funding for the group home, but they needed individuals to start doing therapeutic foster care. So working with the more intense youth, because at that point our youth only had a choice. They were going to either go to detention or they could go into a therapeutic foster home because these foster parents have a special skill set. And so similar situation as myself. And so I just took that situation and I put it into the novel, where Leander goes to live with Ever Geimausaddle whenever he's 16, and he's kind of out of control. He's hyper aggressive, and Leander's personality is based on a lot of the guys that I grew up with. And so the setting in that particular chapter is in Lawton, Oklahoma, which is on the Southern Plains. And Lawton is I was like a gritty kind of environment. There's not like a whole lot of money in that community. So we have communities that feel very urban. It's not like a super big city. It's a lot smaller than Oklahoma City and that surrounding area. You have about 1 million people around Oklahoma City area, whereas Lawton might be like maybe 60,000, 80,000, something like that. So it's smaller, but it's probably as urban, has areas that are as urban, if not more urban, than Oklahoma. And a lot of people will say that Lawton is probably a more dangerous environment, just because the lack of economics that that play out in that area. And so that's the environment that Leander grows up in. And so he's based off a lot of the guys that I grew up with Kiowa Comanche guys that are in my family. Some of them were my cousins. Some were guys from the neighborhood. So in the south side of Lawton, there's an area called the View. And in the View, there's like, I want to say maybe 10, 12 blocks on the south side of Lawton, and they're all Kiowa Comanche people. They're built by the Comanche Nation, and it's in the poorest part of town. And so, but the individuals who live there, like on the Southern Plains, a lot of Kiowans and Comanches are intermarried, and so like all my cousins are Kiowa Comanche mix, and so those neighborhoods are all filled with Kiowa Comanches, and so it's kind of that I grew up in. That's where all my cousins grew up there as well. So when I was in Lawton, that's where I was living, and so I grew up between Tahlequah and Lawton, Oklahoma. So my Cherokee side's here in Tahlequah where I live today. But Leander grew up in this very aggressive environment, and so Ever Geimausaddle, the main character, comes into his life and tries to alter the trajectory that he's on, because he grew up in a similar situation, and so he understands Leander's struggle. And so in a certain way, Leander has it worse off than Ever Geimausaddle, because Ever had family members who were stable enough to kind of pick him back up, whenever he was slipping and sliding. Whereas Leander, both of his parents are incarcerated, and he doesn't have extended family member who can step in and kind of pick him up. So we're going to see Leander as a teenager, but this is at a point after Ever Geimausaddle has been working with him for a couple of years and trying to help him overcome that aggression. And so this is the last section in that particular chapter. And so we've seen a lot of ups and downs with him between Ever and Leander, and getting to a point where Leander's similar to where Ever was at a certain point in his life, where he's got to make a choice, and we get to see whether he's going to make that choice or not. So I'm just going to dive in here. So this is Leander Chestnut. The only thing that kept me from putting myself back into detention was the local teen center. I was allowed to go between noon and 3 because that's when the other kids were in school. I was around adult staff for 3 hours, but they were cool, and I could play video games, lift weights, play basketball, get on the computer, or play pool. A few months later, Ever found me a volunteer job for a boys and girls club. He pulled some strings and he set up some rules like zero tolerance, and I had to have an adult staffer with me at all times. He put his reputation on the line. My job was to help elementary school kids with their homework after school. They'd all drive to the club after 3 on buses. Sometimes we'd play dodgeball or basketball after all the homework was done. After being there for a few weeks, I started to teach a few of the kids how to draw. I liked the aggressive kids. They made me laugh with some of the things they would say. I taught them how to draw lowriders and smile now, cry later faces. After about a month of teaching drawing on the side, the director of the club caught wind, and she made it an official class, my art class. My peers at the club were my age, but they weren't kids from the ghetto. Most of them were white. These teens were overachievers, talked about getting mad about a B on a test, or argued with each other about which was better, University of Oklahoma or Oklahoma State. Teens with aspirations were freaks to me. They actually wanted to be leaders in the community. At first, I'd tell them to shut up if they even walked up to me. They reminded me of the kid I had a pop in the mouth at the high school. But then they complimented my drawing, and a few of them joined my class. They were afraid of me and they didn't talk shit. I liked that. After a while, I started to check myself on a lot of things, like my language and talk about thugging. It was different, but I wanted to be a good influence. And Ever found a GED class for me. I went from GED class to the teen center and then to the Boys and Girls Club every day. I hung out with Ever and his family on the weekends. If we weren't at the powwows, then we'd be at the gym or a park. Something happened. Still, every day it seemed I woke up hardcore angry. I don't know why. One morning, we were running late for my GED class. Ever barked at me a few times, rushing me, and I got agitated. I was trying to hold in all my anger. That morning, we climbed into Ever's car. I blasted him, and I clenched my fist, and I started to growl like those mangy stray dogs running down the alleys. I tapped my knuckles on the dash. I wanted to slam my fist into the windshield and splinter it. I'd watched my father do that once. I visualized it clearly, my knuckles banging into the glass and the glass cracking under the force and my knuckles filling with blood. If I could do that to a window, I thought, what could I do to Ever's face? He snapped at me. You took too long as he sped out of the apartment parking lot. I reached the side pocket of the door and pulled out a pencil. I gripped it to stab him in the throat. I visualized that too, how the car would swerve and crash, how I'd get out of the car and run. I looked at Ever's face, his long black hair in a tight ponytail. Suddenly, I couldn't remember what my own father looked like. Did he look like Ever? Why did I care? Did it really fucking matter anymore? Ever was the one rushing to get me to school on time. He was stressing out to help me. He showed up every day, rain or shine, good or bad. I reached back over to the side pocket and pulled out a pad. I quickly made myself draw. I suppose Ever was right about small expectations. They rise like water. So,
Ooh, thank
so
you
that's
so.
what,
I'm sorry,
yeah,
what did you say?
yeah, no. So that's where we get Leander right at that, that pivotal point in his life where Ever has been trying to get him to redirect his anger. And what he does, and I did this as well with my youth when I was working with them, because they were great visual artists. I bought like stacks of drawing pads, and I bought a ton of pencils, and I would put them all around the house, and I put them in my car. And anytime they would feel aggressive, feel like they were starting to get agitated, they would have something near them they could pick up and they just start drawing. And so Ever Geimausaddle does the same thing for Leander Chestnut in the novel. And so there's a pad and a pen right there next to him. And so this is the first time he's ever done it on his own. Like typically, as that chapter plays out, Ever is asking him. As soon as he starts getting agitated, Ever's like, "You want to draw? You want me to go get you a pad and pencil?" So Ever's initiating it. So at this point, right, Leanne, he takes the initiative. Nobody has to tell him, "Hey, you're upset. Won't you start drawing?" He just does it himself. And so it indicates that moment of change, that shift in his personality where he's realizing, that he can do it himself. He doesn't have to have someone around him to guide him. So, Leander Chestnut, I mean, like I said, based off of a lot of the guys I grew up with, there's a young man that in my cousin Quincy Toshkar were close to. His name was BJ Chestnut, and big. I mean, he was 13. He was already 6 foot tall when he was 13. He was just a big guy, a really big guy, and he was aggressive. And he ended up going to prison as an adult. But we had too many of us in that neighborhood who either ended up prison. I lost a lot of when I was a teenager. I was losing, Kiowa Comanche relatives, and my brothers and sisters in the community were getting killed because this was back in the 90s. And then the 90s is, referred to as that drive-by era. And that was just a common feature, back then in the neighborhood. You would hear just random gunshots, especially on the weekends. You had to be really careful about who you were around and where you were at and what neighborhood you were in. I think that, me and my cousin Quincy, we were lucky in that we were the youngest of all the cousins. And so our older cousins, knew knew everybody in the neighborhood and a lot of people in Lawton in general. And in hindsight, after we became adults, we realized that, they were telling other people in the community, like, don't mess with them, leave alone. And so because we were so young, like we got protected. We got protected in ways that others in the community didn't get protected.
Yeah.
But Leander is kind of based off of some of those individuals who unfortunately didn't get that kind of direction. So, but yeah, Leander's kind of an homage to those young men that I grew up with. So what I like to do next is read just a little section out of Up E. She's the second to last character, And Op-E Geimausaddle is super important in the book. I mean, this is a big pivotal point for Ever Geimausaddle himself. So like I mentioned before in the previous chapter, he's an adult, he has kids, he has 3 biological kids, and he also has Leander, who he's adopted. And he's fallen at this point in the novel, he's kind of fallen on hard times. And Op-E is his relative. I mean, she's a distant relative who's never really met him because Ever Geimausaddle's mother grew up in Lawton, whereas Op-E grew up in Carnegie, which is north of Lawton. And Op-E is much older, is like an older cousin to Ever's mother. So she would be like kind of like an aunt, like a great aunt.
Yeah.
But Op-E in Kiowa, the translation is big sister, but it also translates to great grandmother. It's the same word, means the same, and it speaks to that cyclicality of life. And it's also a term of respect, like if you reach a certain age, or if you're someone that a lot of people will have respect for because maybe you hold a lot of cultural knowledge, or you're an embedded part of the community. You might be called Op-E, you might be called big sister. And it's signaling that someone respects you if someone calls you big sister. And on the male side, we have a Segi. And so Segi, in its direct mundane translation, just means uncle. It directly translates to the mother's brother, who is an important familial figure in our families. But Segi is also similar, where it's like I might call someone Segi who's not really my uncle at all, but I'm saying I respect you if I call him Segi instead of his name. But Op-E is that kind of a figure in the community, and so she comes to find Ever Geimausaddle at a powwow, and then immediately starts to recognize who he might be, and starts to make connections. She starts to make connections between Ever Geimausaddle and his mother, but also Ever Geimausaddle and his grandmother, Lena Stopp, who is the first character in the novel. But you'll start to see some of those dynamics, those relationships play out in this particular chapter. And there's like some cyclicality that happens there. But what I'm just going to read a couple of pages here, and we'll get a sense of his relationship to Ever Geimausaddle. But we're also going to get to see how the community wraps around each other whenever things are getting hard, and what that might look like in a Kiowa Comanche way, or on the Southern Plains. A lot of Southern Plains tribes do this as well. So, all right, we got Op-E Geimausaddle, 2010. But all those years, and I thought Lena was Kiowa. Didn't even find out until last year at her funeral. The preacher pulled me aside and asked, Op-E, do you know Lena's clan? I made a face, slapped him in the arm like he was joshing, because Kiowas didn't have clans. Then he went and told me Lena was Cherokee. Ugh, he'd have thought she was Kiowa all my life. Uncle Vincent had first brought her around when I was just an ankle biter. I must have been 10 or 11 years old at the time. This was before they had Uncle Vincent and Aunt Lena would travel from Lawton to Carnegie for family visits. Once they had Lila, they visited less. Then after Turtle hardly came around, I always remembered Lena because of the quilt she gave me. Then I saw Ever at the Gort dance selling quilts. Made me think of his grandmother, Lena. I watched Hank Quitone spread a Pendleton on the floor in the middle of the powwow arena, not too far from the singers. I thought the societies were honoring the drum, taking up a collection. I think it was Scissortail or maybe Rocky Boys. We invited singers from different parts, but it turned out that the blanket wasn't for the drum. It was for my nephew, Ever, his 3 littles, and his adopted son, Leander. Leander worked over in Lawton at the tire plant, so he wasn't there that day. I met Ever before, even though he was my na'i. He was a nephew through my cousin Turtle, who I hardly knew. Uncle Vincent had relocated to Lawton after he served in the Korean War to find a job. There wasn't much work in Carnegie, so Kyle was often moved to Lawton or Anadarko or Oklahoma City. It surprised me to see Ever at the powwow. He had our family's distinctive look, with arms long enough to reach the top of a roof. I couldn't help but think of his mama, the way the corners of his mouth turned downward with sharp lines. But I suppose all us Geimausaddles had this similarity. Ever led his kids into the arena, and they walked behind him from oldest to youngest, like a family of ducks crossing a busy road. They came to stand behind the Pendleton blanket. Sean was 10 and the oldest. He took after my uncle Vincent something fierce. Then there was Shiloh, 9 and built broad like his cheese side. Shandy crawled into my heart as soon as I saw those pigtails. She was 8, but had a younger spirit about her. Hank Quetone had a microphone in his hand and he announced, I'm calling for a blanket dance. This is for my nephew Ever Geimausaddle and his kids. The company he worked for lost all its funding, so he was laid off and his car was repossessed. He's having a hard time getting his kids to and from school. We're asking for any help you can offer. An elder Bowtone handed Ever a gort rattle. Then I saw Hank's wife, my cousin Lila, carrying a Gort Club shawl, baby blue, into the arena and heading for Shandy. The shawl was too big, so Lila folded it in half. Shandy shrugged to hold the large shawl over her shoulders, shifting this way and that, the way Littles did. None of them had any regalia. They wore jeans and t-shirts, all folded alongside the blanket, waiting for the drummers to start the song. I've seen many blanket dances in my day growing up, boy. But there was something especially heartbreaking about a single parent down on their luck. Many of us, most of us, could see ourselves in Ever, like we had either been there or we had either been where he was or feared we'd end up there. We were taught to give or else more would be taken. Streams of people walked into the arena while drum beats and voices filled Red Buffalo Hall. We crumpled bills in our hands and tossed them onto the blanket. We stood next to Ever and his 3 kids and danced alongside. Must have been a good 30 people out there. The line of people made a half circle around the drum. Ever to one side with the Pendleton blanket spread in front of them. Some Gort dancers moved through the arena while the singers' heavy and low voices carried through our bodies. We danced the way Kiowas danced when called by our people, by our ancestors, to help each other heal. Witcha, Hank Quetone yelled into the microphone. So beautiful. All the dancers dipped a little lower and rose a little higher to the drum beat, and the singers prayed for our spirits, calling for our ancestors. Step into the arena, dance with us, honor this young man and his children. By the time the song was finished, the blanket was filled from edge to edge with crumpled dollar bills, and we were filled with a renewed energy. Sometimes a blanket dance can fill up your spirit, and this was one of those moments. I'll never forget it. A gift. And I'll stop right there. And so that's, that's a moment in Ever's life, where we get to see how the community, it has these certain customs and rituals, I think every tribal community that I know of that I've been able to witness has something similar, if not exactly that same blanket dance, but something similar where they step in and they help each other out, get through some of these hard moments in their lives. But yeah, so that's up, and that's just a little bit of taste of calling for a blanket dance for those of you who haven't had a chance to read the debut.
Thank you so much. And for any of you who haven't yet read this remarkable book, I just cannot praise it highly enough. Really do yourself a huge favor and read this book. It's just remarkable. And it was such a pleasure to reread it recently. And then it's also wonderful to hear you read from it. You were able to see, this is why I have my notes to read from, because otherwise I get stuck and I babble. You didn't only do a remarkable job in writing these distinctly unique voices, 12 very different voices, but when you read them, it's amazing how much your voice really changes too. Your accent changes. It's so I'm very glad that you're one of the readers of the Audible. I haven't listened to it yet, but now I want to listen to it because you're just so good at performing.
Yeah, I was really happy. I was really excited that I got to audition. I got to audition for that.
That's so funny.
And it's just because of what you had mentioned, where it's really distinct. Like that Kiowa sound is very distinct, and they picked up on, like, Algonquin picked up on it right away, and they were like, okay, well, we want you to read it so you can capture those nuances. But yeah, it's fun to do that, because Leander's got like this rough kind of voice, and then Alpi, completely different personality.
Yeah.
And it's
Uh-oh. I don't know if you're stuck or I'm stuck.
personality that
Okay.
just kind of puts me at ease.
Well, okay, let me look at my remarks so I don't get myself lost in the weeds of my babbling. I just wanted to say just a few things in praise of this book. As I said, I was impressed by the utterly distinct voices of each of your narrators and how much I believe in each and every one of them. There wasn't a false note in the entire novel, and also how the title of the novel encapsulates what's happening in the book itself. The novel being a story about how a community comes together in their different ways to stand with this central character of Ever. The stunning writing, the use of language, so many favorite lines. I just have to say a few favorites that jumped out, like Lena says about Turtle, her emotions barked like a blue tick. And oh my goodness, Araceli, how do you pronounce her name? Araceli.
Araceli.
Araceli. I love her voice so much. And when she said, I held on to old family resentment like a piece of earth holds on to a tombstone, I just burst out laughing because, yeah, I know some folks like that. And she also said, Kiowas held on to lineage like legacy was redemption. And yeah, that's a little bit of a Dakota thing too, not just the Kiowas.
Yeah.
And also, you gave me some near heart attack moments where I was so invested and worried about characters. I actually had to stop reading sometimes just to catch my breath. And I'm not kidding. I just was like, okay, it's going to be okay. You read the book before. It's going to be okay. Examples are when Leander, that moment that you talked about where, he's so triggered by being rushed by Ever, even though Ever's doing, him a favor, that, he's thinking about stabbing him in the throat. Or when Opie is trying to get back the children's quilts that were sold. I'm like, oh my God, I hope everybody, is nice about it and we'll let her take those back. And then wondering if Ever is ever going to be successful in claiming one of the Cherokee Housing Authority's repossessed houses. And I won't give away the ending because it for me, the suspense about that was almost like a thriller. I was like, oh, please, let him get one of those houses. I was just really upset or just worried for him. So as for some questions, I'll start with this one. One of the themes that jumped out at me, given my own particular obsession, was, of course, healing. I was amazed and impressed at how you were able to never pull punches when it came to showing the rugged experiences people and especially children can go through. And you mentioned like Leander and his rough time, but also like Lonnie Nowater. Yet you never leave us in a space of hopelessness. This novel uplifted me. You wrote so compassionately about this multi-generational community of characters, honestly, but without judgment. So there are two questions attached to this comment. One, was that care to avoid judgment a conscious choice, or is it just part of who you are as a person, your natural inclination? And two, did the creation of this book offer up any moments of healing for you, the author?
Yeah, no, yeah, those are good questions. I think that really it was just writing about, my community and, basically individuals who were loosely based on family and community members or friends that I grew up with that that I guess I, like as I'm, you know, contemplating on, see these circumstances that they've gone through, that, like I don't particularly have those judgments myself. And I just want to come at it in an honest way, like I want to be genuine with, with these experiences and with what we struggle with inside of the Native community. And I just, I guess it's just that I don't have those judgments myself, dealing with, and there's some stuff in there that's pretty rough, like Lonnie No Water. How do you capture a character who is strung out on drugs, like, and that is, that completely alters your being, on those kind of substances are pretty, like meth is a pretty intense addiction, especially when you start to IV use. And, it comes from being years and years. I mean, I've been working in the community with at-risk Native youth and, their parents and the community members as well, for almost 20 years now, and just having seen those situations over and over and over again. And I like for Cherokee Nation, I was a court worker for a while, and your task is to help. Like, I don't know if I could stay in this line of work for 2 decades and not believe that people can change.
Mhm.
Like, for me, that was important. I know that and I have encountered individuals who feel like people can't change. But I don't know if I could sustain myself if I didn't believe that. And that's ultimately what I feel whenever I'm sitting down to write. Like with these characters, like even with Ever Geimausaddle's father, Eduardo, who is abusive. For me, and you asked the question about what healing moments that I have personally, and that was a big one, because Eduardo is based off of my father. And so whatever Geimausaddle goes through in the book, I went through that with my own father. And in order for me, because good writing captures characters from multiple angles. It's not, like someone can't, like, I don't really like to write a character and they're just going to be like a straightforward victim or a straightforward villain, or a straightforward hero. Like I want, because in order for, and I need them to have all of those dynamics play out. And so whenever it came to Eduardo, like I saw him initially as a villain because it was based on my dad. And so it took me looking at that character through Araceli's eyes. It took me looking, because to Araceli, Eduardo is her favorite uncle. Like he was funny, he brought her candies, and he did all these like really special kind of things with her. And he was like the family clown, and she was always making people laugh. So she had a different perspective about him than the main character did. And so, but being able to like use her lens to look at this character, it kind of gave me a deeper insight into my own father, my own abuse that I grew up with. And not necessarily that it makes it right, but it gave me the opportunity to forgive in a more deeper way. And I think that's kind of ongoing. Like I've always said that, I would, after my father passed away is when I really got close to him, after he had passed, that I could, it was like at a safe distance where I could have these kind of like internal reflections about who he was, and why he was in those situations, why he made some of those choices that he made. And just in the similar situation within the book where he had kidney issues, he was on medications, he had to have surgery to remove his kidneys. And so, and dialysis treatments, all these, medical ailments that went on in his life that contributed to that. Because earlier on, like whenever he first met my mother, he wasn't like that. Like my mother describes him as being like super silly, super funny. Everybody loved to be around him. And then after the years and years of having to deal with dialysis and all these medications, his personality just slowly altered and altered, and he became much more dark. Like by the time I was a teenager, like I would see him in Lawton. Like he lived in Lawton, and I'd be cruising around with my friends, and I would see him, but I would never say nothing to him. He was just some dude. Like there's that dude walking down the street, but that was my dad. And same way, like I would talk to him, like maybe every 3-4 months I might talk to him, and he would say, "Yeah, I saw you hanging out with your friends on that corner," but he never stopped to talk to me. I was just some kid, and that's kind of the way that relationship was. But in order for me to get that alternate kind of experience, I had to heal myself. I had to come to some level of forgiveness. But there's moments like that throughout the book.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm glad that you had that chance to, through your writing. I found that with the book, and thank you for the incredibly kind things you said about this new book. But it was really very much a healing venture for me.
Mhm.
Spending time with.
Yeah, I could tell as I was reading it, like I could see your healing process in there, and I think that helps. That helps me, like as I'm reading your work, come to a deeper understanding of that kind of wounding, and how did I get beyond certain things, and how do I still need to get beyond other things as well. But yeah, I think it's helpful to read stuff like that.
And well, and the same, it was incredibly moving and helpful to read your book. And I'm noticing that there are more and more very different voices, very different stories, but just more books coming out right now that are addressing intergenerational trauma and healing.
Hmm.
It's as if the generation has arrived that has the bandwidth, the resources. I don't just mean, necessarily money, but just the information out there to begin, and the cultural renewal programs to begin healing.
Hmm.
And so now we're starting to also bring it out into the open, because it was all very hush hush in the past. You don't do that, and you don't want to. Yeah, part of it, I think, for maybe some Native writers, was wanting to be protective of our families and communities, because we didn't want to play into those old stereotypes, like, oh, the drinking, and oh,
Hmm.
but of course damage was done too. And so, but it's really terrific that now there are books like yours that are incredibly helpful and inspiring, in a way that's not cheesy. I mean, deeply, for me, it was spiritual. It was a spiritual reaction. But I wanted to mention your work with the at youth risk. I mean, at risk youth, at risk youth really comes through the authenticity of the details, and just your insight into what they're going through emotionally. It's so palpable throughout the book. And I'm wondering if any of them have read your book, if you've heard from any kids that you've worked with before, if they had a chance to read your book.
I haven't heard it yet. I mean, so far. Um, yeah, I think that, I don't know if they were really readers in that sense. You know what I mean?
Right, right.
Like I remember when I was working with them, I would buy stuff from 'em. That's one of my favorite things to do, is to buy books for people.
Mhm.
And because like I like buying books, and like I have a ton, and I need another excuse to go buy more. So
Right.
if I can buy them and give them to people, then that works. Um, and so, but yeah, no, I haven't heard directly from youth, but like different community members definitely have read it, and yeah, just getting like just hearing amazing, very kind, very kind remarks is just, it's uplifting, and I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful. People will DM me
Mhm.
or some amazing healing words, and I'm very grateful for that.
And that reminds me of one of the many scenes in the book, because you're just talking about powerful and healing. That this one scene that struck me as so powerful was baby Tortuga's death.
Mm.
And she is, for those who haven't read the book, she is Ever and Jimena's baby, and she has a rare form of dwarfism, and her lungs aren't going to be able to develop, and so she doesn't live for very long. Um, but as I read that section, the hairs were rising on my arms, as if I too could feel her energy reaching beyond the page. Because here, actually, I have a little. I think I copied out a little piece to read from her, so people will know. Okay, so there is something extraordinary about her energy, which is electric and moves people. When family gathers to see her, they are suddenly mending fences and offering apologies. The quote about her, that from what you wrote, is that she drew compassion from our skin with an invisible electricity. She did more work for our families in her 3 days than I did in 2 decades. And I was just so curious where this character, this episode came from. Just oof. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was just really intense, and in a big.
Yeah, no, no. I lost a daughter in those same circumstances.
Oh
And
man, I'm
so
sorry.
that's where it comes from. But so Otticelli's chapter is really important to me for a number of reasons, because like in order to kind of cope and figure out how to understand certain things in my life, like I was able to look at the world through Araceli's eyes, and it gave me enough distance, you know what I
Mm,
mean, where I didn't completely break. So
mm,
there's a moment in the novel where Araceli's like, she first gets to the hospital, she sees baby Tortuga in the incubator, and she almost like loses it. Like she starts sobbing, and she's like, I can't, and she leaves the room because psychologically I had to leave the room,
mhm, mhm,
and so with Araceli, I left the room, and then
mm.
she goes to Mexico to get her grandparents to bring them back to the US so that they can, spend time with her. But I needed to leave, like it was hard for me to write that. Like, okay, I gotta go. And so I went with Araceli to Mexico, and that gave me some breathing room to keep writing the story.
Ah,
Um, but so I meant I was just, recounting the emotions that I had at that time. And as a parent, we're supposed to be able to do something,
mhm,
whenever sick, you were supposed to give them medicine, we hold them, we give them soup, we love on them, we kiss them, like we do these things that fix them.
mhm.
We were supposed to fix them. And in this
Yeah.
situation, there's nothing you can do. And it's the most powerlessness I have ever felt in my life. And I've never felt that powerless since.
I'm so sorry, and you're sharing that just makes it that much. You were able to transform that into something that was so powerful and beautiful. I mean, it's tragic, and anyway, there were just so many moments in this book that were like that, where something is just so mm, tragic, and yet again, you're not leaving us there. It's like you're
Hmm.
finding this meaning and this way of looking at it, that uh, that is transformative. That is, yeah, it just gives a lot of readers who've been through, similar tragedies, it gives them something like hope. If they haven't gotten to that place where you've gotten in the writing of this, there's hope for them that they might get there too. And
And then that was kind of the magic of
yeah.
my daughter, who was named after my mother. I named her Virgiline Faith
Mm,
Hokeah. And so similar to the main character names um, Baby Turtle after his mother.
mm,
But there was this interesting magic that happened where um, people just from Oklahoma, and then from her mother's community, all just flocked to the hospital. There was just
mm,
something, like it says, there was the only way I can describe it is in the electricity. Like she just brought a ton of people together, and
mm,
everybody was like just in this healing kind of a space. And I
mhm,
wanted to capture that, as her memory, is that
mm,
she was able to do things for her family
yeah.
that, we might not be able to do in a lifetime. And that transfers into the novel as well, where Baby Turtle is able to do that for the Geimausaddle family.
Yeah. On a completely different, I'm hogging all the questions here, and so I should look at some of the ones that were sent in from other folks that I flagged. And here's a fun one. Um, so a person was congratulating you on winning the 2023 Penn Hemingway Award for debut novel, just so massively deserved. And they asked, I was curious if the author could share how he first learned of this honor and maybe what it means to him.
Yeah, no, that was like a really interesting moment experience there. Um, because I had booked this trip to Montana in back in November
Mm,
2022. and
mhm,
and like the words, like nobody knows who's going to win. And then like we don't get word about, you don't know if you're going to make the long list or the short list or
mhm.
whatever it is. And then so you don't know if you're going to be on the short list for like 2 weeks before.
Right.
And so I had already booked this trip to Montana, and I couldn't, I didn't want to back out of it, like I felt like I was excited to go, one.
Mhm,
So I ended up, like, no, I want to keep this trip in place. And then and then sent like an acceptance letter with my team at Algonquin, as just in case I did win. But the interesting thing about it was that I had gotten to Livingston, Montana, and the award ceremony was the exact same time. The exact same time my event was happening, that's when the award ceremony was happening. As I was in my hotel room, the initial beginning started about an hour before I was to get up and start talking. So I was back in my hotel room trying to see, well, maybe they'll say debut author, the Penn Hemingway will be announced first. But I started watching it for about 45 minutes, and they hadn't gotten to the Hemingway Award. So I was like, okay, well, the book show was just up the road. So I was like, okay, well, it'll probably happen sometime while I'm, talking with the audience. And then afterwards I'll find out, and then I'll know. So I go up to the bookstore, and it's like 2 minutes before, like I'm sitting to the side, and you know how this is right before you're getting ready to go up. You like sit to the side, and then they're gonna come up to the podium, and they're gonna announce you, and then you get up. And so I'm sitting there 2 minutes before, waiting for that to start happening, and then all of a sudden my phone ring. My agent's calling me, and I was like, well, I don't get calls from my agent very often. So I jumped up, and I ran to the bathroom where I have some privacy, and I answered it. And then she told me, she was like, you won the Penn Hemingway Award. And so like 2 minutes before I go up, I learned that I won it. And then I go out of the bathroom, and then they announce me. And then so right there live with those individuals there in Livingston, Montana, I announced, like, I just found out 2 minutes ago that I won. And they were like so kind and generous. Like, like a standing ovation, everybody stood up and started clapping, and it was just like a magical kind of a day. But yeah, having won that was amazing. Like I had always dreamed of that. The Penn Hemingway Award was like, wow, man, that would be amazing if I ever won that. That was one of those awards that from a young age, from when I first started out, when I first started writing literary fiction, that I started to fantasize about, well, what if one day I won this award or that award? The Penn Hemingway was one of those awards, so it was very surreal and a kind of a magical kind of experience.
And did you have a good time in Boston when you were there to celebrate it?
Oh yeah, we went to Boston to celebrate, and that was nice. Never been to Boston before, and that was super super nice as well. They had an event there that was pretty nice to have people show up and have that whole event. But I enjoyed it a great deal. I was at the JFK Library, which is an amazing space.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a ton of fun for sure.
Well, I am so glad. I was so excited for you. I was living vicariously, like, oh, the trip to Boston and everything. So another question from that someone sent in advance. Can you tell us the story of how this book made it to print? I am an inspiring Asian American Pacific Islander author, MFA student, and always curious to hear from debut authors, particularly writers of color, about how they came to be published authors.
Okay. Yeah. So for me, I connected with my agent through Twitter. So Twitter has these pitch events, and I think there's almost every genre has a pitch event on Twitter. And so there's an event called DV Pit, Diverse Voices Pitch Event. And so what you do is you come up with a tweet sized pitch, and on the day of when they have this event, then you tweet it out with a certain hashtag, DV Pit hashtag. And so agents will go on and watch that stream of DV Pit, showing up, and then they'll read the little blurb there and see if that's something that they like. If they like it, they click on it. And I think I had 5 different agents from agencies in New York and LA that clicked on it. And then that's how I connected with my agent, Ali Levick. And so that was, and it can be hard to kind of make connections, because sometimes I think at that point, up until that point, you either just send out a query letter, like a cold query letter to random agents, or you could connect with people at a conference, like a writers conference. But those are the only 2 ways that I knew how to connect. And sometimes it was hard, like getting to a writers conference for me meant like I got to find a babysitter for my kids and because like I'm a single parent, and there's all this stuff I got to juggle, and I can't miss too much work because I got to pay bills, stuff like that comes up, and so it was hard for me to get to a conference. But this pitch event was something that I could do, and so I was really really fortunate to be able to connect in that way. So, but that was my experience.
Well, thank you for sharing that, and I'm so glad that it worked out and that you found the right person to represent you, to get you in the right
Yes.
with the right publisher, the right editor. And oh, this is a total non sequitur, but I read somewhere the importance of Alice Munro as someone who inspired you, as a writer who inspired you. And when I
Yes.
saw that, I went, oh my God, because she was so important to me when I was learning about structure.
Yes.
I would actually take apart some of her stories and I would diagram them, like, because sometimes it's like she was stuffing a whole novel in one story. And
Hmm.
sometimes she would switch point of view. She would take us through 100 years. And I was like, how does she do this? So I would actually write out, she does, okay, this section is in from this point of view. And then, oh, she just skips and she doesn't even say how much time, I would diagram them out. So I was curious in what way she was instrumental to you when you were focusing on developing more as a writer.
Yeah, so Alice Munro came into the picture right as shortly after I started the I and so this is when I first go into like, well, I'm going to be a literary fiction because I was fascinated by like the social justice aspect of literary fiction, and also just that kind of brutal honesty. I really like that about literary fiction. So Alice Munro was one of the authors that kind of introduced me into that genre, and but similar where I dissected her like that, where I would underline, circle. I was just like, reread 20 times, certain short stories that she had just to
Mhm.
figure out how she was capturing, picked up on her rhythm, like the way she, her rhythm or pacing, and the way her voice worked, like where I can, and I did the same thing with similar with Marquez as well, where if I read somebody else's work, I can see a Monroe sentence. Like I can tell, oh, she's influenced by Monroe too. And so if you read Turtle Geimausaddle's chapter, heavily influenced by Monroe. And also Hayes Shade's chapter has that kind of like pacing and that rhythm, Alice Munro rhythm. So, but yeah, gave me an opportunity to understand foundationally some of the voice aspects after a unique, distinct voice. And then I built off of that to create something that's more colloquial to my community,
Right.
or my communities like Cherokee and Kiowa. So yeah, I think that was probably the way that she influenced me.
Thank you. I could keep talking to you, but we're down to our last minute here. So
Okay.
we were told we could maybe run over a minute or two. So is there something that you want to leave with the viewers before I read this exit piece here?
Yeah.
Something that you just want to say about your book, or whatever.
Okay. Um, yeah, no, let me see. I mean, I'm just really grateful that, you hung out with me today for a little bit. Let me get a chance to talk about Ever Geimausaddle family, um and um and then, like, I'm looking forward to future discussions. Paperback is gonna be released in July, and so I think we'll probably start building up to that here in the next few months or next couple months. And working on book two. So book two got the green light, and with the editor, and I will, like, we're still in the back and forth revisions part of it, tightening it up, tweaking it here and there. We're still in that phase, but it's coming down the line.
That's so exciting. I'm just so happy for you. And I'm happy for us, the readers. So I'm really looking forward to that next one.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mona. And it's like a dream come true that I got to have a discussion with Mona Susan Power. That's I'm gonna be like in a daze for
I,
a long time. Tomorrow I'm gonna be like, wow, that happened.
And I was just so nervous because I'm like, oh, I don't think I've ever moderated before, and I'm clearly not good at it. So I was like, let me do.
You did
I was
wonderful.
praying. I said a prayer to my ancestors and your ancestors. I'm like, please help me do a good job for Oscar because he deserves the best. So.
Oh, thank you. No, it was great. It was perfect.
So that's all the time that we have this evening. And thank you again so much, Oscar, for penciling us into your busy spring. This has been a virtual presentation of Club Book, a long-running literary series of MELSA made possible by the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. Special thanks again to Hennepin County Library for the part they played in bringing Oscar to us. Before you log off, look for the Club Book survey link, which is in the comments and will be projected in place of my video momentarily. Last, consider joining Club Book on Tuesday, April 18th for their next virtual program featuring New York Times chart-topping romance novelist Allie Hazelwood. Sorry. You can learn more about it at clubbook.org. Have a great night, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.